have a contributed funds program. Some of the folks here have made gracious contributions to that program so that we can open the locks for some days out of the summer season. One of the things that was important to us was a marine highway designation. I have been working at this for a lot of years. The Mon County Development Authority actually worked with the Army Corps to look at establishing a port in Morgantown. This is quite a number of years ago. It just wasn't feasible and practical at the time. But one important element is a marine highway designation. And so UMRA and the people that we're affiliated with fully support going forward. Hopefully this group would vote in favor of going forward with marine highway designation, and hopefully Department of Transportation shines its light on that, and we're happy to offer our technical assistance if such a thing occurs. We have done that in the past, and we'll be happy to continue to do that in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary. Anyone else like to speak publicly? Okay, we'll in fact close those again. Next is the approval of the minutes. I think Ron made the motion. Do we have a second? And Steve seconded. Is there any comments or discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same. Motion carries. Okay, Director, committee reports.
Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, the Citizens Advisory Committee did not have a quorum. It's the first time we haven't had a quorum in a long time with them. I think it was primarily because of the graduation events that were ongoing on that Thursday. So we do not have a report from the Citizens Advisory Committee.
Next is Finance Committee.
All right. Beginning in March, we had a beginning balance of $65,597.50. We had 3 deposits during that month, totaling $44,452.24, 18 disbursements, totaling $19,786.74, leaving us a balance at the end of March of $90,263 to carry over into April. In April, we had 2 deposits totaling $30,308.97, 20 disbursements totaling $22,750.37, leaving us a balance at the end of April of $97,821.60.
I'll entertain a motion to accept.
Move to approve.
Have a second?
Second.
Jeff, second. Any discussion? Follow-up? Comments? Alrighty. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carries. Thank you, Mayor Lewis. Okay. Now it's your turn. Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've been fairly busy of late. I will let you know that we've had discussions with both the Federal Highway Administration and the Division of Highways about the Greenbag Road project, particularly the community garden project that the MPO worked with the city of Morgantown on, and they are looking into whether that project can move forward in advance of the actual construction taking place. If the state is in the right-of-way section, since they've obligated the funds for the project, then we should be able to move that project forward and starting up community gardens as part of the Greenbag Road project. We do have the Greenbag Road study agreement that has been finalized with the state, and that is for the design of the remaining portion of Greenbag Road to be looked at. We're now waiting for the state to have an agreement with the Federal Highway Administration on that, since what we're doing is allowing the state to utilize the RAISE grant that the MPO successfully wrote the grant for the funds. So all that is in place, and then we will be moving forward for the design portion of the remainder of Greenbag Road, and also the feasibility study on the multi-purpose path that parallels Greenback Road as well. Some of you all may have observed that work has begun on the Laurel Street RFB crossing on Patterson Drive. That's moving forward well. Also, everybody I'm sure has noticed the Beechhurst project is ongoing, and there have been some snarls going on with that, but ultimately we certainly believe that'll provide our residents with better level of service throughout that area, and we certainly hope a safer level of service there. The state has scheduled a meeting, and I will be attending it, with the scope of work for the Smithtown Road intersection design project. You all may remember that's the project that we allocated some of our STBG funds, our carbon reduction program funds to prepare the design, and the state has selected a consultant and has that design study ready to start going. I'll be attending that meeting in Charleston on the 26th. Also, the State Highway Safety Program was recently adopted. They're required to do a 4-year plan just as MPOs are. They recently adopted their plan. That will incorporate the pedestrian focus areas throughout the state, including Morgantown and Huntington, and it will move forward the pedestrian initiative that the city and the WVU have worked with the MPO on, and including improving pedestrian safety throughout the community. So I know we had a presentation from them in 2021 about that, but that process is finally kicking off, and the steering committee for that will meet in mid-June. And so that'll be the first phase of getting that done.
Hey, Bill, what's going on over there right now?
Where,
The Patterson Drive area? Is that a city project or is that?
the Laurel
State.
Street?
Yeah.
State.
No, that's the Laurel Street.
That's the
crossing.
Is that what it's gonna be?
Yeah.
Cause it just kinda came out of nowhere. Remember
Yeah.
we asked about it last MPO meeting, and all of a sudden,
Yeah, it's the Laurel Street.
the weekend before graduation, there's cones everywhere,
Yeah,
which we're not complaining about, but no one knows along that.
yeah.
Unfortunately, we kind of can't really control when the contractors begin work on these things.
But that Laurel Street is what's going on there. And that's pretty much my report.
Just for clarification on the Smithtown Road intersection.
Yeah.
For the public that's watching, that's the Greenback Road.
It's actually just south of Greenback Road,
Right.
but it's up the hill.
Right.
It's where the motel is.
Right.
And the state has done a preliminary environmental study on that and has a recommendation for signalization. And this is a study for the consultants to come in and do the design work, and a full-blown environmental study on Smithtown Road.
I know we talked about that intersection for years, but just want to make, we refer to it differently, and the public may think it's down Smithtown in that area, so it
Yeah.
is, it's close to home.
It is just south of Greenback.
Okay, any other questions for the,
Bill, remind me, and we're all for the community garden, but what was the requirement, and what triggers that, and
Well,
funding and things like that?
That was the community garden that had been located where the roundabout is to go in at the intersection with Kingwood Pike. And so the NEPA study required a mitigation aspect for the loss of that space for the community garden. And so the MPO worked with the city to develop a program to allocate funds to start up to 4 community gardens throughout the community, using the federal funds to start up the community gardens in place of the community garden that was lost at that intersection.
But it's still going on.
I'm sorry?
That community garden's still happening right now.
Right, but if we've entered the right-of-way phase for the state to accomplish it, then the funds are available to implement the community garden. And the Federal Highway Administration did express that they would like to, that could get underway quickly. state's researching that and verifying it. I did have a meeting about 2 weeks ago with FHWA, a strictly informal meeting, and so that was part of the result of what I heard from them.
Anybody else?
Yes.
So, the study you were just referring to, where you're talking about Smithtown is 70, is the same as 73,
Yeah.
and where the Morgantown Motel is. And the end of Greenbag Road, at some point, we had talked about needing some, to
And
connect properly to Smithtown and keep going. Trucks were having trouble with
That's what this whole study-
the tilt of it, but is
I
that
will
part of
bring,
it?
I will bring that into the scope of work in the discussion.
Okay,
And what we will have is actually two different projects that I'm going to have to kind of act as the glue to make them work together.
uh-huh,
The Greenbag Road Design Project, which we're still
Yes.
waiting on the agreement with the feds,
yes,
and this project. And I will sit on the steering committee for the scope of work for this project and bring that forward, and then we're just going to have to stitch them together to make sure that they take that into account with their design.
it's almost like an S-turn, where you go
Yes.
down, you turn like
Well,
this,
one
and then you have
ends.
to turn like that,
Yeah,
and,
yeah, because the signals will be very close to each other. So they will actually have to probably do synchro work to
and
make
as,
that
as
work.
no kind of truck expert,
Yeah.
I know from talking to, when you brought together
Right.
people who drive trucks and people who use trucks, they talked about the cornering there was the wrong direction.
Yeah,
That
the
it- that
super
it- that-
elevation of the curve is
And so
wrong
it
for
makes
them.
people feel uncomfortable when they're going around that corner, so if we could make it so that we're not working contrary
Right.
to, comfort and safety, that would be good.
Yes.
Yeah, and on the Greenbag Road project, am I to assume that this construction season you will actually take the gardens?
I won't take the garden, but my
Not necessarily.
understanding from the obligations of the funds, and I think Brian can speak to that better, is this coming fiscal year is when the funds are obligated. So that could be from July 1st all the way to June 30th of next year. And of course, if it is a contested acquisition, then they have to go through the condemnation process and all of that.
And we've identified the other locations already for the
Community gardens, no, what we proposed in the NEPA process with the city was to actually have a process where applicants from various neighborhoods can apply for those funds to implement the community garden project within their jurisdiction.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I don't think the idea of having people apply for community gardens terrible. I just think, I'm wondering where the land will come from.
Well, and that's why we're talking with, the neighborhood associations from the city would be available if there's, and it's urban, it's actually funding that's available urban area wide. So if someone from Star City or Granville or Westover wanted to apply, they have open property, they could do it, they could apply for it as well.
So you're saying, and again, I'm just really confused about this, and I'm not begrudging anyone for making public comments or having events on the downtown courthouse square or anything like that, but at least in my mind, this project has a lot of controversy around it. And I don't have a comfort level that anyone said, we're going with this except for what's been released. But you're saying that even though that process, and if we go back out to Suncrest, could take years, that money's gonna be available next year, no matter what. And then if that project gets canned,
We will have to investigate that.
do we have to, whoever uses it, do they have to give the money back?
At this point, there is no, and we'll double check the the implications
Look
of
at
that
look at the
before we
fine
do it.
print.
Yeah, it's,
We'll double check on that in case there's an issue.
because there's certainly two trains of thought in the community right now. One is that project's gonna go, and the other is that project's not gonna go. So, and personally, I mean, I don't know where I even believe, I know what we've done, but I'm not sure if it's going or if it's not going personally. So,
Well, we haven't heard any, feedback from the state or the Federal Highway Administration about it, and the Federal Highway Administration did approve the NEPA document,
okay.
and the state obligated the funds.
That was my only question. If this thing gets held up in years of property acquisition, is there a responsibility, if it doesn't go, for whoever, whatever entity to use those funds to pay them back if it doesn't?
We'll verify that, before any program begins.
Okay.
No funds will be given out. They're gonna be taken back.
Yeah, that's my point, that if,
Yes.
will they move to another budget year, or what's the process, so?
They'll end up moving to another budget year.
Could you just describe the Laurel project, just so people know what that is? Because I think we're gonna need some connections on the university side of the Laurel project to kind of,
It's
don't
essentially.
need, it would be useful to have some.
It's essentially the installation of a pedestrian crossing, including a pedestrian refuge island in Pattison Drive at Laurel Street, and including a beacon, similar to what we see on University Avenue, to alert vehicles of pedestrians making the crossing there. And that's a result of the safety audit that we did with the state and Federal Highways Administration after the fatality at WVU. And so that process came out of that. So there will be a said crossing.
Are they gonna address the
It would be nice
light
if it had
at
connectivity.
Morrell?
I'm sorry?
You know, that light doesn't have that delay on it, that Morrell Way, I think is what it's called there.
The leading pedestrian interval?
Yes, are they addressing that? Cause that's a big issue.
I do not know that that's part of that project. That is actually the district's traffic operation engineers. And we can certainly request him to look at it. But he hasn't always been cooperative on this.
And maybe if they would, at least if they say no to it, one thing that would be helpful is to eliminate that right-hand turn on red, and have it on green only. That is, we deal with it every day. So, you know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about, right? So,
Yeah.
and maybe that's the simplest solution, is just eliminate the right-hand turn on red, and then that gives you the throughway that you need. But that's, that's coming down from the Coliseum, turning back towards
Yeah.
the rec center.
Yeah, there were a lot of discussions, I think, between the district and the university on that whole
That's
issue.
a concern, yeah.
So, we'll certainly bring it back forward to them again.
So this is a new crossing halfway between the Coliseum and the,
Well, no, I know about that, but what
Yeah.
I'm saying is,
yeah, no,
And Morrell.
where we're, I don't wanna speak for, we haven't had this discussion as far in depth, but people are safer crossing at the new crossing than at the existing one if that timing's not adjusted, because you've got a clear walkway to get from one side to the other while a car is turning right on red, and there's neither the pedestrian or the car is wrong in this
Right.
situation. And unless we adjust that, it makes this new Pattison crossing probably the more safe crossing, if that makes sense.
I think that's the idea everybody wants to, we wanna use the new crossing.
And that's where I was going with that, so.
And
Yeah.
And we'll certainly talk to the traffic folks on that.
I think you'll probably find that many times you do a project, you see how it works, and then you make adjustments accordingly. And I think the idea idea of this crossing is to solve this safety issue that, and then we'll see how well all that operates, and if we have to fine tune other things, like say restricting right turn on red, maybe it's during peak hours or something, who knows? But we'll see how it all operates before we go in. And just like any new signal or anything like that pops up, you have to kind of, you do the best you can, making your best guesses and studies and everything, what your timing needs to be, and then you adjust accordingly from real information.
We'll definitely keep an eye on it. I did forget in my report also the students that we talked about with Brookhaven Road and that intersection that the MPO Policy Board had me send a letter about. I forwarded that information from their presentation to the appropriate people with DOH, and I will be following up with them on phone calls after they've had a couple of days to digest it. So that's also on my plate.
Anybody else? All right, now we get down to the good stuff. Monongalia River Highway designation. I don't think we'll have any problems with the pedestrian issue on the water, so.
Well, there was this one guy.
Yeah, one guy will walk on it. Well, if you freeze it, I'll walk on it. I'll let you introduce our guest.
Sure. Thank you. The city of Morgantown has been working with the Port of Pittsburgh on getting the Monongahela River along with the Allegheny River designated as marine highways. The most recent legislation that was passed by Congress actually removed a city's ability to be a sponsor for a marine highway, and they moved that responsibility to metropolitan planning organizations. So the city can no longer be the local sponsor in West Virginia for that. And we've been approached for the MPO to be the sponsor for a marine highway designation for the Monongahela River in West Virginia. We have Mr. Tim Pickering and Mr. Scott Charman here. Mr. Pickering is with the U.S. Department of Transportation, and he was going to give us an overview of what a marine highway designation means, and Mr. Charman will be talking about the Port of Pittsburgh and how we'll work with them on this issue. So as Mr. Pickering, if you would.
Good evening, and thanks for having me. I'm a native West Virginian, so I always enjoy coming back. I'm from Martinsburg, and I went to college both in Morgantown and in Montgomery, down in the southern part of the state. I've been with the Department of Transportation for about 8 years. Before that, I worked for the Navy for 20 years at the Military SEAL Command, so I've always been in the maritime role, and I'm also a retired Naval Supply Corps officer. So the program that I managed was created by the Clean Energy Act in 2007, and it said the Secretary shall designate marine highway routes, and then there was a step that it created also, which was to designate projects on those marine highway routes, and then those projects could apply for grants. And so, starting with the first step, when I first got there 7 years ago, we had 18 marine highways. We now have 29, so we've expanded considerably. We've been working with territories and states to expand the reach. We now reach 41 states, the District of Columbia, and all 5 U.S. territories. So this year, Congress had been asking for several changes to my legislation through our legislative process, and this year they gave me everything I asked for at once, and beware of what you asked for. So this year they added bulk products, as that was the only commodity that we could not support. They gave us, we can now work with ports in Canada and Mexico to try to capture freight before it comes across the border, keep it off the roads. And the last thing was they eliminated that designation phase of the projects. So now we're down to the marine highways, and then you're eligible for grants. And so one thing that makes my program different than other infrastructure programs, which is what we fall under, is that private entities can apply, and along with public entities. The private entities have to have the sponsor of the marine highway route approve their, not approve, I shouldn't say it, endorse their application for a grant. And just to show you how this year's, with this change, we ran into our first hiccup with this, was there was a company in Washington State that wanted to apply for a grant, and they're on the Marine Highway M5. The marine highways are numbered in accordance with the interstate systems. They roughly parallel. So the M5 runs down the west coast. So they're unfortunately, Washington State doesn't have a role with that. It's Oregon and California. So they applied to Oregon saying, would you please endorse us for a grant? And they said, no, we have nothing to do with you. We don't know what this is about, and we're not going to help you. So while we could have carried on with just the Port of Pittsburgh, they could have sponsored the entire M79. We think it's important to have ownership by the state because you would then be working with your local businesses and also with your public entities on grants in the future. Now, our grant program is relatively small. We've had a total of $100 million since 2016. That pales in comparison to others. But the difference with mine is my grant money is only to create services, marine highway services. So we don't build docks and things like that. We buy machinery typically. So if someone here wanted to start a container on barge service, for instance, and they needed a container top handler and a forklift and some yard hustlers to move them around, all that equipment would probably be less than $1 million, and they could come to us, and we would give them that money. And we've been very successful. There's a service on the James River. We've got that's carrying 60,000 containers a year. There's almost no intermodal trucks moving on I-64 between Richmond and Norfolk. We've had another one that operates between St. Louis down to New Orleans. Again, they're moving 100,000 containers a year on that service. And with this new change where they added bulk products, we suddenly could approach states like West Virginia and work with Pittsburgh on the rivers that traditionally haven't had any bulk break bulk or containerized freight. And so I'm very excited by this. The application is actually great. We've actually reviewed it. And what happened was it went all the way to the lawyers, and they looked at it and said, oh, by the way, we just noticed that states were removed, or cities were removed as an applicant. We had not caught that, and so it went, back to ground zero. So we're starting over, but the application is fine. I think all they really need to do is update it with the names of the new sponsors, and it's going to go through. So, anybody have any questions? Or yes.
I will tell you, basically, I don't know anything about the project and what you're talking about. I've not studied on it. But my concern is, and I would speak for the agricultural community, as you know, a few years back, there was a pretty big Supreme Court ruling about the waterways of the U.S. And if we do this, does this put any type of liability on the waterways outside of the Monongahela River?
No.
So there's no restrictions can be placed upon the agricultural community.
No.
What's not there now?
No, we don't have anything to do with that. We don't work with. We've had, we've gone through issues with the Corps of Engineers. They're separate from us. We interface with them, but we don't work directly together. And there's no liabilities, even if you were to endorse a private applicant and they were to get a grant and then default on the grant, nothing flows back to you. The grant agreement is a legal agreement between us and the recipient. So there's really no harm, no foul for you guys to approve this.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Bill.
Oh, I'm
Get
sorry.
your guns out. Can you give us some illustration of how this has been used and what your expectations are of this particular program? What are the benefits?
Well, the benefits is that the length of the river that would be designated, and Scott, do you know what's the length of the entire system?
Vance River terminals, which I just visited this afternoon, is 100 miles, so I think it's
So that length of the river would be then eligible to apply. Any entity, public entity or private entity with the endorsement of the route sponsor would be eligible to apply for grant funding under our program.
And typically, what are those grants?
Well, like I said, typically, we're granted. You're asking what kind of equipment what do we normally grant for?
Yes.
Okay. Well, our grants typically are in the $2 to $3 million range. They're relatively small, but they're focused on just the equipment. So we don't subsidize a service. We can't provide a operating subsidy to pay for your fuel or something to operate the barges or the tugs, but we can buy the equipment that is needed to kickstart it. And what we provide is up to 80% of the cost of the. So if you have $1 million project, we can grant up to $80,000. And another change in our legislation this year, which I'd also asked for, was that rural projects and tribal governments can ask for a waiver of that. They can ask for up to the full cost of the project.
And I will let you know, we have been contacted by Advanced Terminal. They are interested.
I'm sorry, say that.
We have been contacted by a private provider who's interested in one of these grants already, even though we're not a sponsor.
Yeah, I understand the potential of this. I'm a little foggy with the application. In other words, believe me, I want to move this forward. I think it's probably an economic benefit, no matter how you couch it. But when we say you buy equipment, is that equipment to create?
To move freight, whether it's something like
All right,
container chassis or
loading facilities.
loading facilities. I guess
Cranes,
now with
whatever.
I've never worked in the bulk world, so I have to. I'm going to several conferences this year to get smarter on it. But whatever conveyors or loaders that they use, that equipment, if it's not state of the art, can be applied for under this program. One of the big things we're doing is electrification, of course. With the new administration, that's one of the big things we're pushing for. So Taylor has Big Red, the equipment manufacturer, is starting to electrify almost all of their equipment. So you can buy everything from container reach stackers to trucks now that are electric, and those are looked upon very favorably, of course. That's I'm trying to think if there's anything. We can do planning studies. That's another thing we can do. So if you need money to design, say if you wanted to, I know they were talking about a port in Morgantown. If you needed $500,000 to come up with a design for it and do the engineering for it, that's an eligible element as well.
Good, and thank you. That helps considerably.
Yes, we'll send somebody
Yes,
over here.
So, and Mayor Lucci can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Vance Terminal has an earmark in that has made it through at least the initial round for some improvements or a grant application of some
That's
sort.
correct.
Is that correct?
Yeah, they're going to, he's gonna come in and talk to us. I believe it's June 5th. We have the paperwork wanting us, the way I understood it, it almost has to go to a city and not to a private group. Is that correct? That's
The
the way
city
it
has
was
to be the
explained to
RE,
me.
yeah.
I believe that's the case, yes.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
I believe that is the case, yes.
Okay.
What are they called?
For
Communities
us basically
funded
to
something, right?
sponsor it,
We
we
don't
will
use earmarks
consider
anymore.
that once he
If
explains
I
it.
recall, part of that, because I was on some of those initial discussions, was to improve the rail access
Yes,
to the terminal where they could get coal to the, I'm not using that as an example, they could get coal to the terminal and then move coal on the river.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
But so, I guess my point there is, we already have at least viable operation
For sure.
on the river, and in my opinion, if nothing else, we should approve this, because certainly that could be an entity that would use, and I could see an equipment grant, wouldn't you, for
Yes, sir.
something like that, so that is, I know I was involved on the early part of that
Right.
request to
Yes.
congressional funding, and
Yeah.
so.
So this
That-
funding would be, upgrade. In other words, you may have a site that's already operating,
Yes.
so you could use it to upgrade, get closer. 'Cause
We
I'm
have,
thinking of,
like, we worked with the port of, the terminal at Red Hook in New York, which is a container terminal in Brooklyn, and they've replaced almost all their equipment, not really changing the way they're doing their business, but going from equipment from 1970 and 80s to, state-of-the-art low emissions or no emission equipment, things like that.
Brian had
I was gonna say, I think this whole conversation about the grants, there seems to be grants for everything, highways, waterways, railroads, everything out there right now, and, I believe the one that you're kinda talking about came across my desk, and another one of those duties, Brian, take care of mentalities, trying to get a letter of support or endorsement, and it came in so late we couldn't do it, and in that same vein, I guess the question I kind of have is, what's the impact, if any, from a state perspective, and any contact, anybody reached out to Cindy Butler, who is our director, or whatever, what you want to, of our multimodal division, which handles airways, waterways, and all that, and I'm just kind of curious as to what the impact, if any, is on the state of West Virginia.
There's no impact from, on the state itself. I mean, but I have talked to the state multimodal director, and we had about an hour and a half call, actually, very engaged individual, and I'm really looking forward to working with him, because as I was telling some people before the meeting, we had a meeting in Weirton, when I came to Morgantown. I came from Weirton from a meeting there, and I stopped here on the way home in 2019, and we had tried to get the state port authority, whatever it was called back then, to attend this port conference, and they wouldn't show up. They said they didn't see any equities for them. So we went from that to this gentleman who seems to be very engaged. He's very excited about this. He will be supportive of it. All it is, he doesn't need to be, but he's supportive of this, and we'll also be talking to about the Kanawha River and the Big Sandy, perhaps some others that are also primarily coal-moving rivers, but would now be eligible. So, I hope that answers your question. Okay.
And again, clarification, when you said the 124 miles, that would be from the Fairmont area all the way up to Pittsburgh?
Please.
This is Mr. Scott Harshman with the Port of Pittsburgh.
Yes, and thank you very much for the invitation to join your policy committee here and to have this discussion. From the point of Pittsburgh to Hildebrand is 106 miles. So to Morgantown Lock and Dam, it's 102 miles on the line. So if you get Fairmont, you go down, it's 126 miles. And I want to thank you on behalf of the Port of Pittsburgh for having this meeting, for supporting with a letter of support we did receive when we put this application together. Here's the application right here that Robin Hess from the City of Morgantown and myself primarily put together with support from various organizations throughout the region, including MPOs, including our MPO in Pennsylvania. And Cindy Butler did provide a letter of support in the application. We received, I think there was over 28 letters of support, including from the congressional delegations, to private businesses, to nonprofits, to recreational communities. And I want to thank Mr. Barry Pillai, too, for your public comments today in support of this initiative, as well as for your years of dedicated promotion of the importance of the Monongahela River. The Port of Pittsburgh Commission, we cover a 13-county area of southwestern PA created by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And we're all about the movement of freight on our rivers, but also promoting the recreational opportunities that come along with that. We've looked at this program before, and as Mr. Pickering, and thank you for coming today, Mr. Pickering, too, and thank you for your ongoing encouragement. Tim and his team, we've had a number of discussions over the last 2 years. Even in COVID, we did a online virtual meeting related to the Marine Highway Program a couple years back, encouraging us to put something together. And this is where the partnership with the Morgantown region, came together to put this application together. We are not asking for any money right now. This is just a route designation. We will partner with you, the MPO, the Port of Pittsburgh. Anything West Virginia, coming under your jurisdiction. Anything in Pennsylvania, come under ours. Obviously, when things cross and that's part of the attraction of this. This is multi-jurisdictional, multi-state, and it's a great opportunity to get more freight moving on our rivers. I came down early today. I had lunch in Grandma's in Granville, visited Vance River Terminal, had a couple hours, drove around Morgantown, and I tell you, I mean, this is a growing area. And what the MPO and the challenges that you have in front of you, I think it's a good thing to have. I'm coming from an area in Westmoreland County where we're losing population drastically. And you see the population growth in this region. You see the construction, the discussions you've had earlier about intersections and so forth. This is an opportunity, and part of this is easing congestion. Opportunities, when there's opportunity to move freight that can go on our rivers, get it off our highways, ease congestion on the interstates. And this would be very beneficial not only to West Virginia, but to the Pittsburgh region as well. So we're excited about this. We are not asking any money. We're just asking for this route designation. A big holdup in the past was the reason that bulk material was not an eligible entity. We've advocated for that change, and it's great that that was implemented. The Allegheny River is part of this. We cover the Allegheny River as well. They have issues, a lot of issues related to the Allegheny with loss of commerce on the Allegheny. But I'm happy to report just 2 weeks ago, our new governor in Pennsylvania made an announcement that there's a new company coming to New Kensington, which is right on the Allegheny River, one of the most impoverished communities in southwestern Pennsylvania. And they're investing $81 million in a 175,000 square foot facility that's going to create 300 manufacturing jobs right along the river. There are opportunities there. Our rivers are this natural highway that has served our region, our country, for centuries. When you go back to the history of the Monongahela River. So we're excited. As I mentioned, I'd be glad to answer any questions. We will need to work out, hopefully upon your approval, working with your team, the interagency relationship between the two of us. Because those opportunities that someone had mentioned about, Vance River Terminal is a perfect example of that. He's got some major plans over there. It's impressive. And he can go out and pursue these funding opportunities this next round. So I'm hopeful that sometime this summer, hopefully in July perhaps, from our discussions when the Secretary of Transportation is able to hopefully approve this, we'll get this designation, and this will enable the entire Monongahela River to pursue, an interest along there, pursue funding in the future through the programs that Mr. Pickering had mentioned.
When you say bulk material, that would mean, what's the definition of that?
Yeah, what is it? Is it trash?
Because what I'm asking, I guess, is that, and you brought up Vance, which is a very good example, but they're moving a lot of coal, and could move a lot more coal, a lot of limestone and sand and those kind of products out of there. Do those products fit under bulk, or were they already? So
Yes.
that's a game changer for those.
The way it was written previously, it was new freight moving on the rivers,
Okay.
containerized, unitized, palletized. We move coal, we move bulk materials, we move stone,
So
aggregates.
that was my
Right?
question.
So that was not an eligible entity unless you can do super sacks or something.
So one of the big changes, at least for the Vance, would be that now fits into the definition of bulk, whereas before it did not.
Correct.
Gotcha.
And this will also connect to the M70. The point of Pittsburgh, where the Ohio River starts, the Ohio River is part of the M70 already marine highway route. So this will make the northeastern part of the inland waterway system, opens up all kinds of new opportunities. There's a lot of focus on container on barge, especially down south in Mississippi. We want to do some of that work. I know Marriott has made some investments along the Ohio River related to some of those initiatives. And that's one of those new types of freight that we need to look at to move on to Monongahela as well. Yes, sir.
Just curiosity speaking, I know a lot of locking dams around West Virginia is been undergoing a lot of rehabilitation because of, 50, 60, 70 years old. Would this make improvements to those lock and dams eligible for funds?
It would not make funding available for the locks and dams. What it will do is encourage more traffic and more freight and more tonnage to move through the locks and dams.
Yeah, that's
So
why, that's
that's
kind
where
of the
the Corps of
concern, is because a lot of our lock and dam systems can't handle that expansion as they currently stand. They want wider loads, longer loads, everything like that. So that was just a kind of one of those, roadblocks in a sense that, for more products to flow through, the lock and dams is obviously a key component of all of that. And I was just curious as to whether any of the funds could be used for that, because as you know, those will run, tens to hundreds of millions of dollars.
We are hopeful, as you probably have followed over the last 30 years, the Charleroi Lock and Dam on the Mon should be completed here in the next 2 years. 30 years it's taken to do that because of the piecemeal funding through Congress. A lot in the bipartisan infrastructure law freed up, put a lot of money into it, and we have a projects on the Ohio River that are slated to be modernized next. So we're going to have a modernized inland waterway lock and dam system throughout our region in the coming years. And that presents a whole new opportunities for freight companies and shippers and barge companies to get that freight on our rivers, free up congestion. It's good for the environment. It's the cleanest, most environmentally friendly way to ship products. You just got to find the right cargo to move.
Yeah, I know one of the things, I'm actually currently involved with the West Virginia Freight Plan. We're updating our freight plan, and of course, waterways is one of the key components to it all. And unfortunately, we're still in a truck-heavy delivery system. So anything like improving your waterways for bulk transportation it's a plus. It's a huge deal.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if it's appropriate, but I make the motion that we accept.
Well, as long as everybody else finished with asking questions.
Did you say something about fees or something we'd owe in the future? What was that about? I thought I heard something about that.
Fees?
Something we would owe in the future?
No, what we will need from the Port of Pittsburgh and the MMMPO is come to some memorandum of understanding on how a request will come in, say Advanced River Terminal, someone wants to ship something through there, that gets routed to you, right? If something that's going up on the Allegheny, it obviously comes to us, or the Lower Mon, that comes to us. So anything in West Virginia will be routed to you, anything in Pennsylvania will be routed to the Port of Pittsburgh. We just need a one-page document to pull that together. But there are what we're talking about now is just the route designation. There's no money, there's no fees, there's no membership fees, nothing like that to that. What it enables, as Mr. Pickering had indicated, when we have this route designation, when a company such as Vance or anyone else decides to pursue a grant opportunity, they will need to come to you to say, we are submitting this, do you give you okay? It's not, I don't know the proper terminology, but endorsement. Yeah, right. Just endorsement.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was actually going to be my question, if that was putting us in a position of having to approve something, but we're just endorsing it, and then it goes on to you for approval or disapproval. Is this,
Simply a letter of support is what.
lost my train of thought now. Oh, how long, is this a time frame? Like we will be this for 20 years, 10 years, whatever, is this forever? Okay.
The legislation requires that applications be reviewed and acted upon within 180 days. So we will have no more than 6 months to come up with get it to. This goes through a review that goes all the way up to Secretary Pete, so he will sign this, so you'll have something suitable for framing on your wall. And we have 2 weeks. this is all written into the legislation, very specific. We have 2 weeks from the time that it's approved to let you know that it's approved, so, and that won't take that long, you'll find it the next day. And we'll try to arrange for a ceremony of some sort, if we can, have the administrator or even if the secretary's in town or something, or in the region, they come down for a photo event and do that. We try to do that when we can, but there's no time limit on this. It's designated forever.
And once you approve it, then we're out of the picture. We won't be any policing efforts from
No,
us or any of that.
The only thing you, like, as stated, you would maybe approached by private entities about getting, endorsing a letter, a grant application.
Right. I mean, once we've done that, then
That's it.
we never look back after that.
No,
Gotcha.
there's no,
I just
they
didn't
can't, we're
wanna,
not gonna come back after you if the grant fails or something. It's
well, what I'm thinking of is our constituents coming to us and saying, well, this is going on the river. And we're saying that's not our bailiwick. Once it's approved and they're doing their thing, then we're out of the picture.
It's another tool in the toolbox for your economic development. It gives you the opportunity on the economic development side, transportation. We submitted the application, February 13th was the date that we submitted the application, so 180 days out from there.
there you go.
Hopefully it'll be affirmative. But we feel pretty confident. As Mr. Pickering said, they reviewed initially the application, it looked good. There's gonna be a marketing side of things in regards to now that once we get it. And I think this is something, the relationships that we have with the Port of Pittsburgh and others, we can do some things, as Mr. Pickering said, when they do an announcement, but also marketing this is gonna be very attractive to a lot of the river businesses up and down the lawn and the outlet.
And one thing we've had, we've only had this happen once. We have 29 current designated marine highways, and the state of Hawaii has named theirs like you name interstates, after, they named it after Senator Kaka. You would have the opportunity to as well. I mean, something that you can consider. That also brings press. We've got, down in Arkansas and Oklahoma, they've actually put, signs up when you cross the river. It says they're crossing the Missouri River and it's Route M40. So those are some things that to bring awareness to the system. And I think the Pat White Waterway is a good name for it.
We can't have any public comment now. One more and then I think we've.
So, I have two-part, but hopefully you can address them quickly. But one is, we always have maintenance issues that we sort of talked about at the beginning of this conversation. And I'm wondering if having this designation helps with, or just, I guess it would be having the more activity would presumably help with having more maintenance.
We actually have a meeting with the Corps next week in Pittsburgh, and we're going to discuss this because I think I'm not fully inside how they do things, but their levels of service and their maintenance is based on freight volumes.
Right.
That much I do know. So I think if we can show an increase in freight volumes, it would bring additional money and hours and those sorts of things to the waterways.
And then for either of you, a recreation component to this, how does that fit in?
We only deal with freight, so that's
Only deal with freight?
Yeah.
But when you look at getting more tonnage going through the locks, levels of service, having the locks open for certain times, and I know
Yes.
this is something that I'm around.
Right.
And
Right.
on the Allegheny River, we have what's called the Allegheny River Development Corporation, very similar to Barry's
Yes.
organization, that provides those contributed funds to help keep the locks open in the summertime and having manpower to allow recreational boaters to go through.
Yes.
So that is part, the Army Corps of Engineers, that's not the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Maritime Administration. So that's a separate entity, but if we can get more freight going through the locks, that's gonna benefit
Oh, more
that
hours.
opportunity for more
Yeah.
hours, more funding for the operations and maintenance of those facilities,
Well,
and
that's,
as well as recreational boaters get that benefit as well.
yeah, we've had significant bass tournaments. We have a large 200-person kayak club that does flat water kayaking.
particularly on the Mon. We have a new facility on our waterfront that rents out boats and paddle boards, so I see them as being compatible uses and wanting just more activity and more use on the river in general to just make use of an asset in our community, so.
It's very important. I also serve as a secretary for the Pittsburgh Safe Boating Council.
Yes.
So we have that barge recreational boater angle there, and concern, especially around the point, because everyone likes to gather around the point. But just for the Corps of Engineers funding, real quick, and I'll be brief. The bipartisan infrastructure law that was signed, passed
Yes.
into law, there's $2.5 billion of funding that went in for locks and dams in the inland waterway system.
Yes,
We got nearly 1.1 billion of that in the Pittsburgh region. So we almost got, a little, almost, what's that percentage? 35%, whatever that is, coming to the Pittsburgh region for the Mon projects on the Mon and the Ohio, mainly the Ohio, because the Ohio has all 3 locks on the Ohio River and the Pittsburgh region need to be rebuilt. So that's a major investment by the administration, by our tax dollars, into the importance of the inland waterway system.
yep,
Thank you.
whatever we can do to encourage maintenance, thank you.
Okay, actually what we'll be doing here is voting on a resolution. And so I'm going to go ahead and read the resolution, and then I'll entertain the motion. Whereas the United States Congress established the Marine Highway Program to expand the use of the nation's waterways, and whereas increased use of the Monongahela River, used to Monongalia County Schools, Monongahela River for freight transportation is consistent with the urban areas transportation plan's goal of integrated multimodal transportation system, and whereas the increased use of the Monongahela River for freight transportation is also consistent with the MPO's goal of improving system reliability by increasing options for freight movement. And whereas economic growth is occurring along the Monongahela River, and whereas the Port of Pittsburgh and the City of Morgantown have worked together to develop an application for the Monongahela River to become part of Marine Highway 79. And now, therefore, it be resolved, the Policy Board hereby agrees to co-sponsor an application for the Monongahela River to be designated as part of the federal marine highway system. So I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Moved, seconded. And we probably should have had all this discussion after we did all this, but if there's no other discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I assume I have to sign that. But we'll do that. Okay, so, thank you, gentlemen, for coming.
Myself. I'll be back in West Virginia. On a side note, I'll be back on Saturday and Sunday. My son plays 15 baseball in Bridgeport, spending money in West Virginia. And as a matter of fact, I think of the 6 teams in the division, 5 of them were Pennsylvania. You guys are doing something right, especially on the recreation side, because you come down here a lot in the summer baseball. But thank you for your support. Look forward to working with you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is
Budget
Yeah.
selection guidelines and process for federal sub-allocation funds and projects proposed for the Transportation Improvement Program. This item, the full document was included in your agenda. Just as a brief update, we have been in discussion about the status of sub-allocated funds to the MPO from the Carbon Reduction Program and from the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. And we worked with the Division of Highways to work out how these sub-allocated funds would be allocated to the MPOs. It was a lot of long discussion, and the West Virginia Association of MPOs had a meeting with Secretary Riston in really the March, April timeframe, I forget the exact date. And we came up together with a process for the real sticking point was the sub-allocated surface transportation block grant funds. The federal legislation on that is a little bit wonky, saying that the state and the MPOs have to work out an equitable formula for the distribution of the Surface Transportation Block Grant funds. And the distribution that was worked out was each MPO, and there's 7 MPOs, 7 of the 8 MPOs are under 200,000, so they're eligible for the funds that we're talking about. And the process I've worked out is 10% of the suballocated STBG funds will go to the state for potential overruns for projects that are selected for this program. 20% will be suballocated to the 7 MPOs that are under 200,000 within the state. And then the remaining, it's actually 70% of the funds will be available for applications for projects to the MPOs, and they will not be available statewide because of the federal language that they are to be equitably distributed among the MPOs. So that gives us an approximate allocation of suballocated STBG funds of about $570,000 a year. The suballocated carbon reduction funds, which has the unfortunate acronym of CRP, it's Carbon Reduction Program, our allocation is approximately $340,000 a year. So between the two programs, that gets us approximately $900,000 a year that the MPO Policy Board can program. Those are rough numbers. They're not exact numbers. I have a little better numbers in the cover email. But the STIP operating guidelines, which is where all of this is documented, also require each MPO to have a process for allocating those funds and determining which projects they will go to. MPO staff worked diligently, and I must congratulate Jing. He did a great deal of this work to develop a process where we take a look at our Metropolitan Transportation Plan and we grade projects that are submitted to the MPO for the use of these funds. That is the process that's in front of you all tonight. It's focused on our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, accomplishing our Tier 1, Tier 2 projects are part of the scoring process. Also accomplishing the performance measure goals that the state has and that the MPO adopts every year are also taken into account. Meeting goals such as safety. I won't bore you with reading all of them. Safety is also a high priority in the process that was provided to you in the package. Right now, we're actually dealing with 2 years of funding. The MPO has already requested that the state provide funding for the for the Smithtown Road Design Project, which we discussed earlier. That was $200,000 worth of our funds from 2 years allocations, and we have $400,000, and it's a total of $500,000 with the match that's being provided by various partners for the downtown micro-simulation study. So currently, the MPO has approximately $1.2 million between the 2 fiscal years of funding that we can program with of these suballocated funds. And so what we're trying to do is institute a well-designed, and we believe it is well-designed, process for evaluating those funds and reporting the staff recommendation as well as the Technical Advisory Committee's recommendation and the Citizens Advisory Committee's recommendation for how to allocate those funds. What we would, if this policy is adopted by the Policy Board tonight, what we will do is we will design a 1 or 2 page application that will have some also documentation requirements. For example, if it's like an intersection project, do you have traffic volumes, those sorts of things, not necessarily a deep study, or other documentation that you can have. These funds are eligible for a wide variety of projects, from purchasing vehicles for Mountain Line to intersection improvements, which can be 100% federal fund. Normal projects, like a widening project or a resurfacing project, which is also eligible for this, have a 20% match requirement. But safety projects and those sorts of projects, traffic signals, those sorts of things, if it's on a federal aid eligible roadway, can be eligible for up to 100% funding using this process.
As example, Morgantown could bring up something that they would like to have, and if
Right.
it fits into it, they would not have any.
We could request
we could
100%
go-
funding.
right, They would have nothing
for it.
invested in.
That's correct. Also, sidewalk projects are eligible funds. So it's not a big pot of money, but, it can do significant improvements to intersections. Another thing that could be eligible would be, for example, a design study. For example, you have a big project, like a sidewalk project, that you want to apply for. Well, you don't want to use your local funds for the design. You can use these funds for the design of those projects, and that would probably require a match. But it
As far as the study, you
As
mean,
far as the-
required
yeah.
a match?
yeah, the study would require the match. There's a whole long list that Jim put together, and he didn't even really cover it all, because there's one clause in there, if you take a look at it, that says anything that was eligible for STBG funds before the passage of the last infrastructure bill is eligible for funding as well.
It's a big list.
So, I mean, it's a big list, and we have a 5-page list behind this. So there are a lot of projects that could be done in this area with those funds. Another thing that we can do with these funds is, if it's up to the policy board for us to allocate them, or a design project, or if a small municipality has, one of the reasons we have on-call consultants is we could, if Star City or somebody needs a design, we could allocate these funds for the design and then utilize our consultant to do the design for Star City, and then Star City can take the design to the Division of Highways. So really, there's a lot of flexibility in how you can make this process work. We need to make sure we're meeting the federal guidelines when we do this process, and having a written policy on how we're going to do it is a key element.
So is there any more than 20%? Is there any situations where their buy-in would be more than 20?
Not required by the federal legislation.
So it'd just be the 20.
Just the 20. Now, I mean, that could theoretically be up to the policy board.
We could require more.
You could require more.
I'll let you cover that.
That's why I have a Kevlar vest.
Yeah.
But, no,
So for example, the sidewalks in Westover, the
Right.
study, that could have been, they would have 20%, we would put in the other 80.
we would put in the other 80%.
And then once you had that, they could apply for grants to do the sidewalks.
Or they've got to do a design anyway.
Right.
So we could provide that service to Westover.
So that's not totally out of their pocket. I see
Right.
Brian raising his hand, he's probably gonna tell me I'm wrong. Go ahead.
It
Couple
depends on
things
the
here I
pot of
wanna
money
kinda
that
throw
you
out.
will-
One, when you made a statement that, hypothetically, if Star City wanted to do design on an intersection, we need design right-of-way construction phases scheduled. If you're doing a study, that can be standalone. We just don't do engineering without something behind it. It's, the only time we do that is, and it's really only happened recently, was the Transportation Alternative Program. For years, an applicant would submit something, we're requesting $250,000, and they get it, and they find out, well, engineering's eating up 200 of it. They don't have any money left for the actual construction. So we started allowing them to apply for engineering, and then after they do that, then they apply a second application for actual construction. The carbon reduction funds and the STBG, that's not usually how things are done. They're usually engineering right-of-way construction phases are all programmed at the same time. You don't set up an engineering phase and design it without something behind it.
So you need the whole program at one time,
Yes.
but eat the elephant one bite at a
Yes.
time.
So now, a couple other quick things. As Bill mentioned, you got the 10% set aside for overruns. Each MPO got 20% sliced out. There's a big 70% pot that's open for basically everybody. Okay? not saying you're gonna get the other 70%, but it's there. And essentially a competitive basis. It's still gonna be, even if Morgantown has the best 10 projects, you're not getting all 10. That we have to spend some money in other MPOs.
It does have to be equitably distributed.
Okay, but the problem was, it's just taking that straight off, okay, 10% set aside, and then the other 7 split equally, and I'm just gonna make up a number. If Morgantown was to say, well, your share was gonna be $3.7682 million, it's hard to nail that number on the head. So you're giving everybody some flexibility in there as to how all those funds can be spent. So don't just limit yourself to a $1 million program. If you got an intersection, okay, well, the design's gonna be 400,000. Right away, you might have to, particularly where you're at, you might spend only 20,000, you might spend, 8 million. Sometimes those projects, and again, they can build up over time. We've all seen how long it takes some of these projects to happen. You might have a great idea for a project that we're on board with, we'll put match, maybe it's even 100% federal aid eligible. So, it's gonna be a learning curve for all of us. This is the first time we've really done anything like this. So, but the key thing right now is to establish a process that an MPO is supporting, because the last thing we want to see is you guys submit 72 projects to us with really no backing. Okay, you're going to have to make some decisions amongst yourselves as to which 1 or 2 or 3 projects you're going to try to support. And, and while all this, and I'm kind of keep spitballing, Bill, let me ask this question. With the selection criteria and scoring, and I'm just hypothetically throwing something out there, let's say you get, hey, we want to resurface this part and this one and this one. Resurfacing, I guarantee you, is going to be a popular choice for people to submit. I don't think anybody in this room is going to think otherwise. Is there a minimum score for that to be eligible in the eyes of the MPO? Because
We
a
have not
resurfacing
established
project's
a minimum.
not going to get a whole lot of points when you break it down into this.
We have not established a minimum. What we would do is report the scoring to the policy board at this point. We would have a staff recommendation, but it would be the policy board's pleasure to move a project up or move it down.
And then that's where I also want to follow, and I know I've asked you this before, are we going to set certain deadline dates so that, hey, every June 30th, the board's going to evaluate, every December 31st, the board's going to evaluate, because if you get a submission in February, oh, that's a good project, you send it in. You get another one 2 weeks later, oh, that's a good project, send it in. And then all of a sudden you get one 6 weeks later, say, man, this is the project. Oh, we've already spent our money on the other 2.
Well, and that's kind of one of the conversations that we have not completed. We actually requested from the Division of Highways a schedule for how they're programming their transportation improvement program and what deadlines that they would want for that. And we haven't gotten a response from the Division
I
of
thought,
Highways
Bill,
on
we
that.
established May 31st for the paving projects and either
May
June 15th
31st.
or June 30th for the intersection projects.
I never saw anything on the intersection projects, but we did, this is a work in progress.
And I mean, I could be wrong, but that's what I remembered seeing, was we was having like a June 30th, that's when we request for every MPO to submit their 5 in, and then once every 2 years, that big project that we're really trying to push through.
I think actually, there's a little confusion. I'm sorry, Mr.
So
Justice.
my question is, do we have an action item on this
Well,
tonight, or is this for informational purposes?
This is,
or-
the action item, and what we would like to do is get this approved policy. We have $1.2 million we need to program.
Okay,
And approve this policy. We would put it out for applications in June and July and try to report back to the board with our initial recommendations for those 2 years at the August meeting.
okay. So that,
These are other,
you need a
important
motion to
details.
that effect?
I'm sorry? Yes, sir.
I've got a question on the process, and I understand the staff has worked on putting this together, the policy. Was there any involvement from the policy board at all on how the selection would work. I can tell you, read some of it before, didn't really understand what all he was trying to do. But my question is, if this is going up tonight for a vote, I don't feel comfortable voting on this at this point until some questions are answered within inside this. If we're not up against losing $1.2 million.
We're not up against losing it. We did circulate an informational outline of this process
You did.
to the MPO policy board. And so,
But was any direction asked for to really explain, and I guess part of it's mine because I've been doing other things, as to question, these decisions are going to be made tonight. Because looking through this, I do have some questions about, the funding, some things like he said, where we're going to put the importance. How do you put the importance? I mean, if I was here tonight looking at importance, I'd be throwing the money over right now, the projects I've seen around into the western area, get that darn sewer line taken care of over there and get
that is
that
not
road
an
straightened.
eligible- Unfortunately, that's not an eligible expense.
Well, we find something in Westover that is.
Why, let me
That
ask you,
road's bad.
since we can't repair,
Well,
I think we're going to, but since we can't repair the road until the sewer line's done, we can't use any of that money because it would definitely affect the road.
And there's already a project to resurface that project that's on, that portion of the road that's on hold until that sewer line. That wouldn't be, yes, sir.
I think Joe's point is, and that's why I ask, is this, maybe what we ought to do is refine what the process is gonna be back and either approve it all together or just approve something in concept that will come back to, I think what he's saying is, we wanna know how it's gonna work, right?
Yep.
And I agree with that.
I will, rest assured, no money will lapse. And Bill can also tell you that in our STIP operating procedures, there's a line in there, a caveat, that basically, and I'm, improvising a little bit here, that no money will lapse.
Yeah.
DOH will not let money lapse. We will find a project to put on your behalf.
And Bill, a simple question in that process for me is, so can anyone just come in and suggest a project, or would that come from an entity like Star City or Transit with our
Applicant
representation?
eligibility.
How would that work? I mean, do we submit it through us as individual governments, or can?
Yeah, that's section 1.1. A unit of local government or the MPO itself, an agency that maintains federal and aid eligible facilities or that has coordinated with West Virginia DOH for improvements to a road eligible for federal funds prior to submission of an application.
Okay.
So they will have already discussed it with DOH. A nonprofit entity that is responsible for the administration of federal fund eligible facilities, and that would cover something like the rail trails.
So you're, okay, so like would Mountain Line fit under that, or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so those are the eligible
Okay.
criteria.
Bill, I had just a thought. We've got a room full of mayors. The July timeline really doesn't give anybody time to budget their match against the project. Because when you're putting your budget together, you're doing that in December, January, February. And if you're going to allocate that 20%, I'm not sure that June and July is the best time to have the deadline.
Yeah.
Or this municipality's going to have money sitting there that they could have used on something else, not
Well,
knowing.
and we could push it back.
I don't know what you guys think, but yeah.
What one of the issues, every MPO, every municipality tends to have a different timeline.
Not for our budgets, though. They're all the same.
I'm not talking here, I'm talking statewide.
They're the same, too. They all have to be
But-
submitted by July 1st.
Except the feds.
The auditor has to approve them by the same deadline for everybody.
Also, though, we could, and one way around that would, we would program them for the next fiscal year.
That's what
That
I
would
was
be-
getting at.
That would be the funds from, we have last year's funds and this year's funds, but we could program for the next fiscal year. So if they get the award in August, they would budget for them in the following fiscal year.
For example, if a resurfacing project is proposed what we would try to do is, and we would need these by certain dates on our calendar, so that they could actually meet and get into the spring paving program. We can't wait till October or November to approve projects to get in our spring paving program, because there wouldn't be enough time to hire the contractor, do the plans, the whole 9 yards. So usually that is a process that DOH starts working on in June and July. I think that's one of the reasons why we actually had in the STIP operating procedures moving forward is April 30th as the deadline for the paving project submission. But because we were literally only had like a week or so before that April 30th deadline, we moved it to May 31st.
I think we're also confounding two different things. The suballocation of funds is separate from another application that is in the STIP guidelines. And those are, the MPO was now able to submit an application and do a presentation to DOH management for major projects in this STIP and our TIP. That would be a big project, for example, an outer loop project, something like that. That is to occur as the state is developing their STIP. But that is separate from the suballocated funds. The next process is for, and this is also separate from the suballocated funds, and that's where Brian and I's discussion was getting off track, where we can propose major intersection projects, small corridor projects, stuff that are more than just something we could possibly use our suballocated funds for. And we were talking about the process there. The third one is, and he was talking about 5 corridors, is the STIP-TIP guidelines. I'm trying to take this piecemeal instead of feed it to the policy board all at once. Also specify that you can request corridors be included in the district's paving program. Not fix the pothole in front of Mrs. Jones' house, but if you have a specific corridor that you want to propose included in the district's paving program, there is a deadline for that.
Has to be on the maintenance.
That's
Separate.
Yeah, and you're right, Bill, I do apologize. We were intertwining the two a little bit.
And
Yeah.
right now, we're only really talking about the suballocated funds.
Which amounts to, what'd you say, 1.2 million?
1.2 million at this point. And we will have next year's allocation to portion 2, so ultimately that's like $1.8 million within the next calendar year, or $2 million in the next calendar year that the policy board can program.
Are they carryover?
They are allowed to carry over, but there is a deadline, and that's what Brian was saying, is if we do not expend them, the state will spend them. They will not let the funds.
And these only can be spent on state routes, correct?
Only on federal aid eligible routes.
Federal aid eligible, and there are some federal aid eligible roads that the city has, maybe even WVU.
So University Avenue, I think, would probably, is that one?
I'm sorry?
University Avenue?
Yeah.
Star
University
City,
Avenue.
yeah, all the way through.
Yeah, it's a federal aid non-state route.
But,
Think of, and by and large, most of your federal aid routes are gonna be, in interstates. I can't imagine why anybody would wanna put up one of these projects on the interstate. That, US signed routes, West Virginia signed routes, and a significant number of, high-volume county routes, oftentimes federal aid eligible. But if you're going back out in the County Route 9/1 somewhere, it's probably not federal aid eligible. So, think more your major routes, your major ADT roadways, in most cases.
Mr. Stanley?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to move that we delay the action on this item tonight until the next regular meeting, or if we need to do it sooner, a special meeting, but give us some time to look at this a little bit more with some more eyes and get the questions to our director out there, because I do have concerns. I don't want to delay any projects. I see Smithtown's on there and others. I don't want to delay projects unnecessarily. but I also think that this is a piece of this is a piece of policy that's gonna dictate what this board is going to do, for the, moving out into the future, and we need to get it correct.
I will say, from MPO to MPO, this policy, if you will, is probably gonna vary from a simple one-page state, take care of it, we trust you, to a very involved, detailed process. It's whatever you guys decide to do.
So I'm gonna second Joe's motion and with
Well,
a point.
I guess I want to clarify, you're recommending that we table it till the next meeting.
I'm recommending we take no action on it tonight.
Okay.
That was gonna be my point of clarification, is he's not asking for a table. He's basically, we're
I just pull
asking
it from the agenda.
that this move to next month's
If-
agenda.
If you table, then you can't do anything basically on it.
Yep.
We're just asking the action be moved forward,
To
and
the
that
next
way we
agenda.
can continue to refine.
And have meetings in between, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I would second that.
Mr. Chairman, I think it would be helpful if we had a proposed application bill that we could look at, because that's gonna be, once we get this part, then everybody's gonna say, what's the application?
Yeah, it's one of those chicken and egg questions.
Yeah.
Do I have the policy to develop the application, or, we can do that. But we will keep it as a simple application.
What would be helpful toward, toward refining, or do you want to see, a small group forum? Do you want to have a day when you're welcome to come in and speak, to our administrator and make suggestions, or how do you want to handle it so that we don't get to the next meeting and not feel like we've made whatever changes each person of us might have in mind?
I trust Bill to put some opportunities to have that discussion together, and like, I guess maybe a work set, I don't wanna call it a work session, but the availability of you to come and have that discussion, to have something
Something so we don't
prepared.
get to the next
Yeah.
meeting and we're not prepared.
Well, what maybe I could do is schedule a Zoom call, just to discuss it with no action taken.
Yeah,
And any policy board member who wants to attend is fine, and or, my phone is always open, you can call and ask me questions. But would that be satisfactory, is maybe schedule a Zoom call, and I will also take phone calls, of course. But,
That would meet what I'm asking for. I would
Yeah.
say, give us a couple, 3 days or a week to really look at it, so that
Yeah.
before you have the call, that we have our questions
just in a way, yeah.
ready
Sure.
to look at it overall.
I will tell you that really, the only thing that the policy board is looking at are the applicant eligibility, project selection criteria, and scoring, and the process itself, the first 3 pages.
this on the web.
The first 3 pages. The project eligibility in the following pages are federal guidelines. The policy board has no leeway on that. That's adopted by Congress.
Let me ask you, can you take this document and highlight it in red, what we're basically looking at, what we can't control? Because if we can't control it, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it.
Pages 6 through 11.
David, you asked for the application, or a draft application?
Yeah. And I can do a draft application. But after page, the first 5 pages, and one of those is the cover, is MPO staff work.
Okay.
The rest of it is where MPO staff has put together the federal requirements for eligibility.
So
of
page 6 on
It's
is federal requirements.
Federal.
That's not something that we're gonna be changing.
Right.
And I will say that the requirements can be a little confusing, so any application that comes in, I'm sure Bill, along with the DOH, will determine whether it's eligible or not.
Well, and in the process, we do have a process. The applicant should submit an application that identifies the following items. The need for the project extent, including a map, identified funding source for the match, and identified community support for the project. Those are really the requirements. And then we do the
But those-
scoring.
Those are the requirements set by the state or the feds?
Those are ours.
Okay, but I think, so let me give you an example. I've been working with, on the alternative trail grant stuff. There's 2 or 3 different pots of money, maybe, you know, down in Mark, we work.
Mark
with a lot.
Schuler?
Yeah, Mark
Yes.
Schuler.
Golf with him.
We're working on, and it was like, dude, if I'd have known that going in, I feel like a horse's butt, because, you know, one of the discussion points that we were having in that was, he's like, you should have been over in this fund versus this fund, because I'm limited to 1.2. And then we got into this bigger discussion about, well, you know, that's statewide, that 1.2. So, you know, asking for half of that isn't gonna fly, because he's gotta spread out. So maybe we ought to think about those kind of things, you know, do we have certain thresholds, or is one project gonna come in, or you have to, because my point is, had we known that the reason you didn't get it because you were a big pig and you asked for half of our budget, we'd ask for the right amount, but maybe we ought to put some, you know, if it's trail related, because you mentioned that,
Yeah.
up to X, or if it's paving, up to, again, those are recommendations, but just things to think through.
Well, and that's also something that staff, one of the other requirements that we have is a pre-application meeting, so staff can discuss
That's a
those
good idea.
issues as well with applicants.
I mean, if I'm a sitting mayor on this board, I'm gonna go back and fight for all I can get for Granville or for Westover, wherever I'm from. And, you know, I'm gonna try to find that federal highway that meets the definition and go get all 1.2 if I can. Unless there's some thresholds, that's my point, that, you know, and maybe it's warranted to get all 1.2, but it makes it, I think, having some guidelines would help the process. is what I'm
Well,
saying.
and those really are going to have to come from a discussion of the policy board.
That's fine.
Of how,
Yeah.
and I'm fine with that. We're coming up with a data-driven kind of process, and then the actual allocation of funds is the policy board's.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So when we talk about, like if we don't spend the money, the DOH will,
Yeah.
does that mean it's staying in Mon County?
That's a bad question. That's an easy answer, no.
Yes and no. And what I mean by that is, again, we have, you know, if we was to literally take it out, you know, and say, okay, well, the MMMPO area gets, you know, $1.26789 million. There's no way we're gonna hit that number on the button. You might get more, you might get less, because the grand pot has to equal whatever that amount is, or as close to it as we can. Now, what'll wind up happening sometimes if we can split fund things to, you know, to get it down to zero. But, yeah, there's, you know, I'd like to say yes, but it's never gonna match down to the dollar. You might get more, you might get a little less.
Well, let's put a little focus on it in a little way, and it actually answers a little of Mr. Justice's concern. Really, the budgeted amount that I talked about, the $570,000, is our minimum allocation. There is still that remaining 70% out there that has to be equitably distributed that we can apply for. And so literally what we can do, we could theoretically do is over budget, say we're putting our guaranteed allocation here, and then we will apply for the state for the remainder. And so that to me would probably be the best strategy than setting a hardcore goal. And so what the board would vote on is we definitely want these funds to get our guaranteed amount, and then use the apply for the remainder.
If I could make just a small suggestion, we seem to be getting into the actual discussion that
Right.
we're gonna have after we take this action, and we just keep going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, so,
There's
okay,
been a
we-
motion and a second. I'd
Yeah.
recommend that we move on to a vote.
get on to the next
And get
agenda
out of
item.
here.
Yeah, I agree, because we kind of got off
Anyway.
base there.
Sorry.
Sorry.
So we've had a motion and a second. So,
Question?
well, I think we beat it to death with questions, but I'll open it up for questions.
I don't have a question. I'm asking to call a question.
Oh, I thought you had, I thought you said you
There
had a
is no
question.
question.
Okay. So all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Motion passed.
And so really, what the policy board is dealing with is those first pages. Okay.
There's no point in looking from page 6 on, because
Right.
you can't change any of it.
Right.
Okay, the next one is pavement condition and system reliability performance measures.
Yes. And this item is actually the one item that I think Mr. Carr would beat me if we didn't present to the policy board for a vote, which is the state's performance measures for what are called PM1 and PM2 and PM3, the pavement management performance measures, and the system reliability and freight movement performance measures. These performance measures are presented to the MPO every year. The state goes through an ongoing review of how they are performing in their pavement management, and they set new target goals, and they also reflect on how they've accomplished their goals. We included two resolutions in your agenda package, one for the pavement performance measure, and the targets for example, the percentage of pavements of the interstate system in good condition for 2023 and 2025 are 72% and 70%. Targets for percentage of pavements of the interstate system in poor condition for 2023 and 2025 are both 4%. In other words, maintaining a level percentage. The targets for percentage of pavements of the non-interstate national highway system in good condition for 2023 and 2025 are 43% respectively and 42%. The targets for percentage of pavements of the non-interstate national highway system in poor condition for 2023 and 2025 are both 5%. And the targets for the percentage of the national highways bridge deck area classified in good condition in 2023 and 2025 are 11.5% and 12% respectively. And the targets for the percentage of the national highway system bridge deck area classified in poor condition for 2023 and 2025 are 14% and 13% respectively. So the state has adopted these performance measures and is requesting that the MPO also adopt these goals for their performance measures.
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion that we dispense with the reading of the resolution and agree that we adopt the state's plan and program projects as presented.
Second.
Okay.
I guess we should vote on the first motion. All in favor?
Dispense with the reading.
Yeah, dispense with the reading.
That was my second.
Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Say aye. Opposed? Okay, now I'll entertain a motion for the acceptance.
So move.
Second.
And may I ask for a point of clarification? That is for both the pavement management system and the freight reliability.
I'll
They're two separate
clarify that in my
resolutions.
motion, if you will, in your second.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Is that appropriate
Any-
to do them together? Is that all right?
that's fine.
Great.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Same. Motion carries. Other business. Anybody else have any other business? We will adjourn.
Okay.